Dr. Goodspeed, as the title of this hearing suggests, my friends on the other side of the aisle want to blame higher prices on everything but their own policies. They blame it on supply chain bottlenecks. They blame it on COVID, and they even blame it on corporate greed. And I want to focus on that last narrative for a minute, corporate greed. Let me tell you how it works in the real world, and I'll give you an example from my own district where businesses are struggling with the cost of higher inflation. The Suffaletta family in Georgetown, Kentucky, have been in the retail home furnishings business since the late 1940s. In a conversation last week, they informed me that in the last 18 months, the cost of goods from their manufacturers have increased 30 to 40%, and they're still receiving price increase letters every week. They're also experiencing price increases on sold orders that have not even been produced yet, but they aren't going back to their customers asking for more money than what they agreed to at the time of placing those orders. That's an important point. They're not sitting around the table trying to figure out how to exploit their customers. They're struggling because their profit margins are down because the cost of their inputs are going up. Instead, the Suffalettas are choosing to absorb those additional costs, contrary to what Mr. Drummond's narrative is. They're choosing to absorb them. And like most small businesses, their cost of labor and overhead have gone up over 25%. So now they're having to determine how to operate without passing all of those costs onto the end consumer and still have some profit at the end of the year. This idea of businesses trying to exploit this and profiteer is offensive to most small firms in America today. Now, Stephen Ratner, a former Obama Treasury official, summed it up perfectly. Blaming inflation on supply lines is like complaining about your sweater keeping you too warm after you've added several logs to the fireplace. The original sin was the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan passed in March. The bill, almost completely unfunded, sought to counter the effects of the pandemic by focusing on demand-side stimulus rather than on investment. And that has contributed materially to today's inflation levels. So, Dr. Goodspeed, you focused on the increase in aggregate demand, but I want you to elaborate on your testimony about how the American Rescue Plan also constrained the supply side. Specifically, talk about how the American Rescue Plan stifled the labor supply, which is contributing to the problem that the Suffaletta family is having right now.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And to your observation about what you're hearing from businesses, we have over the past year seen the producer price index outpaced by a considerable margin the consumer price index, which suggests or implies that firms have been taking that pressure out of margin rather than passing most of it on to prices. In terms of the supply side impacts that you mentioned, I've calculated that there has been a cumulative shortfall since the pandemic began in business investment of about $1.8 trillion. Throughout 2021, with the Build Back Better agenda, there was the prospect of substantially higher taxation on corporate income after 2021. That was unlikely to help facilitate a recovery in business investment.
So to the extent we have supply chain bottlenecks, part of that is because there has been less business investment.
That is correct.
Because of uncertainty of the potential of tax increases.
That is correct.
And then explain also how the American Rescue Plan discouraged labor supply.
And it discouraged labor supply in two ways. One, the expansion of the child tax credit as designed under the American Rescue Plan effectively eliminated work requirements. So relative to the 2017 expansion of the child tax credit, remember we doubled the child tax credit in 2017, relative to that expansion of the child tax credit, we actually lowered the return on work. And in addition to that, we extended the $300 per week supplemental federal unemployment insurance benefit, which likely lowered employment by about 1%.
So in addition to increasing aggregate demand and creating excess demand in the economy, the agenda from the administration constrained supply. Let's talk about another area of constrained supply coming from this administration. Is it more likely that oil executives are sitting around their board table trying to figure out how to stick it to their consumers? Or is it the administration canceling drilling leases, closing pipelines, or limiting production? Or is it uncertainty and unease among exploration and production companies that new environmental crackdown will come? Or is it the financial regulators that are attempting to limit access to capital, making it illogical to invest in new wells? Which is more likely?
I would say the unresponsiveness of supply in response to onerous regulation and crackdowns on domestic energy production. Because if we look at the historical relationship between the price of West Texas Intermediate and rig counts, that relationship broke down in 2021.
Thanks. I yield back.
Thank you.